The zero waste movement has gone through so many different iterations, if you will, over the last several years since I've been involved in it. And I think we have definitely moved past the whole like trash jar era. I don't know that anyone is still claiming, especially post 2020, that they're keeping all their trash in a jar. Okay, great, love that. There were points where the zero waste movement was largely focused on DIYing your own things, and I've never been that kind of girly. So we started to see a lot of brands coming out with zero waste, or more specifically, plastic-free items, and those became the talk of the zero waste movement. And it started to seem like buying things equals good environmentalist. And because I have talked so much about zero waste on my YouTube channel, I feel the need to consistently remind people that I don't believe that zero waste is quite attainable. I don't believe that it is the epitome of being an environmentalist, and there are plenty of ways that you can live more sustainably and have a positive impact on the planet without having to buy from these companies who are creating plastic-free alternatives. First up is eating a more plant-based diet. Now, I will say there is some nuance to this, and there's been a lot of discussion around it the last couple years. I respect it. I respect small local farmers who are doing things in a better way. But the reality is that literally, I think it's something like 98% of the meat consumed, especially in the US, is raised on what's called CAFOs, confined animal feed operations. And the confinement of these animals and the mass amount of them that are needed to produce to meet demands today are leading to really big environmental impacts, largely from animal waste that leads to things like dead zones, has a high greenhouse gas emissions, land use, water use, all of the above. And I personally try to shy away from the label vegan, so I'm not here to suggest that that's the only way that you can eat more sustainably. I actually would recommend looking into something called the climatarian diet. I think that's more attainable for most people, and that would be referred to kind of as reducitarian. But my point with all of this is eating a more plant-based diet statistically, in terms of land use, water use, greenhouse gas emissions, is better for the planet. Shopping primarily secondhand has always been my mission on this channel. If you've never heard me talk about it before, essentially everything that we buy has an environmental footprint before it makes it to us, and I find it really important to try to not buy things new because of that fact. And you can find perfectly good or refurbished things, or even sometimes the brands themselves are reselling secondhand and refurbished things, and you can get a warranty on those items and they work just as well, rather than creating a demand for new items to consistently be coming out all of the time. But I don't just mean with big purchases like tech, I mean with every piece of clothing you see me wear is likely bought secondhand. The things in my home were also bought secondhand. I try to buy everything I can secondhand because it avoids the original environmental footprint of creating new products consistently. And there's also the aspect of things that are secondhand would otherwise go to landfill if the secondhand market didn't exist. So you're kind of attacking the environmental impact from both ends when you shop secondhand, and it's always been my greatest passion to let more people know that, to buy less, and when you need to buy something, buy it secondhand. Alternative forms of transportation are something that I have talked about a lot over the years, and I'm so excited to see so many more people talking about wanting to live in walkable and bikeable places to where we don't have to depend on cars because they're dangerous, they're very stressful to drive, they're expensive, and I'm really happy to see that that conversation has entered the chat a little bit more. I'm putting it on here as a solution as someone who lives in Texas, and public transit, the city that I'm from, Houston, Texas, is ranked the worst city in at least the United States, if not the world, for walkability and public transportation. I absolutely know that taking the bus or even having access to a train and even existing where you live is not the most common thing for people who live in the US. But I brought this up to talk about other forms like walking, like biking, like carpooling, and also that if you live in a place where you are car dependent, to consider things like hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and EVs. Those are also alternative forms of transportation that will get us away from relying on fossil fuels, and so I felt it was worth bringing up in this conversation. I will say I'm also considering doing a video once we get a little bit further past the heat. It's not so hot, but in about a month it'll be nice, and I am considering giving up my car for a month and documenting that process. Let me know if that would be interesting for you. I've talked about gardening as an eco-friendly thing to do for many years, but only recently has it started to make so much sense as to why I was saying that. I mean, I've always known that growing your own food, you kind of have control over the inputs, the seeds you use, the pesticides you use, and so by nature, your food is probably going to be more sustainable and it doesn't have to be shipped all over the country, yada yada. But I always feel like food is one of those things where we don't have that much control over the way we get it, and we have to eat. So I've always kind of shied away from talking about food and being really sustainable in that way, because it's something that everyone has different access to and everyone has to eat. So I feel no interest in really like shaming anybody around the food that they buy. But I realize now that fostering that relationship with the planet is actually really, really important. So there's that aspect of, if you're going to be gardening, I do think it's a sustainable thing to do. Even if you can only do it on a small scale, watching something grow, it does something, because we're humans who are meant to do that. Like, we are meant to foster the earth in that way. We are meant to care for the earth in that way. So yeah, even if you're growing something as small as like basil on your apartment windowsill, I truly believe it is worthwhile. But the other caveat to this is like restoring native habitat. That's something that I've been working on for the last year. If you have a yard, if you have a grass lawn, I would highly recommend doing this. But actually seeing critters, I should say, show up in response to the plants that I have put there, and understanding that they are always around, just waiting for something to feed them, if that makes sense. Like, there are monarchs around, you just have to plant the plants that they need. There are swallowtails, which are big, beautiful butterflies all around. You just need to give them a habitat to exist. There are blue jays, there are hawks, there are cute little cardinals. I have a cardinal couple that lives in my backyard. And things like fireflies. And realizing that all of these things exist around us at all times, but I've noticed that I see so far fewer of them since I've grown up, because their habitats continue to disappear. But by restoring the habitat, basically what I'm saying is I've seen them reappear, and it's been really rewarding, and that is something you can do to help the entire ecosystem on your own little piece of land, if you have that ability. Composting is definitely something that is a little bit tricky when it comes to access, but I have a whole video about how you can compost no matter where you live. I'm gonna link it up here, featuring some of my favorite creators, so go check them out. And under that is also avoiding food waste. If you've never heard of Project Drawdown, I highly recommend reading the book and checking out their whole organization. It talks a lot about how we can get to a sustainable and just and climate resilient future. And the top solution that they list for individual action is reducing food waste. The number one thing we can do to reduce emissions is that. And so I think learning how to avoid food waste, learning how to use food scraps in a proper way, things like reusing your veggie scraps to create veggie broth, storing your food properly is also super important. I'm actually working on a video on how to avoid waste when grocery shopping and all things surrounding food. So if you have any recommendations on how to avoid food waste specifically, drop them in the comments. We'll feature it in the video. Going solar or supporting community solar is a really impactful way that we can support a sustainable future and that we can live sustainably. We recently went solar with our house, and I have to say that I have absolutely loved the experience, because I'm a data nerd, specifically because I'm a data nerd, and I have an app that tells me how much energy I'm producing, if I produce as much as I'm using, how much I'm sending back to the grid. There's a hair in my eye, I apologize. And I know that when we talk about solar, a lot of times it itself can seem inaccessible, and in many ways it still is, but a lot of different legislation and organizations have been working so tirelessly to make it more accessible. So if you didn't already know about the Clean Energy Plan as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, that legislation has resulted in a 30% tax credit from the cost of you going solar back on your taxes. I don't know about you, but that is a huge, 30% makes a huge difference in the accessibility and affordability of going solar. And I think it's worthwhile to talk about the Clean Energy Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act, because it has enacted $369 billion in climate action. That is the biggest investment in climate that the US has ever made, and I feel like it's just not getting talked about quite enough. And part of that is giving back the 30% tax credit to people like you and me who are just trying to do our part, not only to help the environment, but also to prop up the grid. If you live in Texas, you know what I mean. I, on my setup, almost got 50% off the cost of my system because I had the 30% off in the tax credit and a $2,500 rebate from my city. So while I recognize that the conversation around solar can seem really intimidating and scary and expensive, and there's been a lot of propaganda out there, I will say also about solar, I think it's worth looking into, and I'm gonna link below so you can learn more about the clean energy plan. You can also, I'll leave a link to see what exact benefits you can get for going solar where you live. I really think it's worth looking into. I'll also link below the provider that I went with that I highly recommend. But this legislation has created a lot of good paying, family supporting jobs, and I think it needs to be talked about more, that solar can be a solution like that, that's like all around a positive thing. So I wanna say also a huge thank you to Climate Power for sponsoring this video. They just want me to talk about why solar is great and also share with you the benefits that we can receive as just people existing in the United States from legislation that they are helping to promote. So yeah, I'm gonna link all of those things below for you. I think another great thing that you can do if you're trying to live sustainably or support the environment is donate to causes that also do the same thing. And there are so many different ways to do that, right? You can support habitat restoration, you can support cleanup organizations, advocacy organizations. I personally recommend supporting more localized action because you can be more assured that they're not corrupt, because I have a video that I'm working on right now where I expose one organization that's actually built on corruption. But that's another story. We won't get into that right now. I think we should bring that back into the poltergeist of what it means to live sustainably and be an environmentalist. I don't know if poltergeist is the right word there. Zeitgeist, maybe. And speaking of organizations that clean up litter and the environment, you participating in one is also a wonderful way to live sustainably and be an environmentalist. Even if you don't have an organization around you that like organizes them themselves, just go on one when you're going on a daily walk, take a bag and take a picker if you want, and pick up trash along the way. I will say in Austin, there is someone who started this, it's just an Instagram group where they organize people. It's called Garbage Humans of ATX, and they just organize cleanups every now and then. There's nothing too serious about it. It's meant to be a way to make friends and build community, but also help out the environment a little bit along the way. That's also something you could do. Start that where you live and, you know, do your thing. Okay, something I personally think I need to be bringing up more is switching your bank. Not keeping all of your money in these huge banks that have been found to be the leading contributors to not only fossil fuels, like not only existing fossil fuels, ones that they invested in years ago that exist, blah, blah, blah. No, the world's biggest ones have invested in fossil fuel expansion. We're talking billions of dollars towards what we already know is destructive to this planet. And when you put your bank and your money in a bank, it doesn't just sit there. Like, they don't just hold it for free and they're all nice and blah, blah. No, that's not what happens. They are able to use your money that's sitting in that bank to invest in these projects. Aside from that, I do think that like just upholding those accounts tells them that you support what they're doing, and they don't need your support. Okay, that's another factor that I'm like really starting to understand the connections here, is that I just don't really want to be supporting or lining the pockets of people who do things that I vehemently oppose. So just, yeah, removing your money from the big banks, finding sustainable alternatives. I've talked about several alternatives on here throughout the years. One of my favorites is aspiration. I keep most of my money that like goes to that I use to pay my credit card, keep it in there. And we use our credit union to finance everything. Like, my car was financed through them, our house was financed to them. We do all our financing through our credit union instead of like conglomerate banks. But all my other money that like I'm not accessing very quickly, it stays in Wealthfront, which is, they have a wonderful and incredible interest rate right now. I think I'm getting like 5% because I recommended one of my friends. So I try to keep as much money in there as I can that's not going to be used for bills immediately. I'll leave that link below too. But just like alternatives to giant banks is a great start. I've always thought saying conserve energy felt a little juvenile, a little bit high school, because that was one of our biggest campaigns when we were in high school, like going around putting signs on the light switches, reminding people to turn them off. But the further I get into this journey, the more I realize it's not anything to be downplayed, because Madison, my partner, works in energy efficiency, and they work with schools all the time trying to figure out how to lower their energy use, because it is really impactful when a lot of people are in a building to lower the energy costs. A lot of times they're talking about the cost, but the energy use, and these small changes can lead to really big savings when we do it on a larger scale. Conserve Energy. I know it sounds cheesy, but it makes a real difference. Attending community events like swaps or estate sales, or there was a flea market the other day that I went to that was amazing. I think that's so much fun. Supporting your community, supporting people around you trying to sell clothing, buying secondhand, all those sort of things. Participating in swaps is really cool. And specifically in Austin, our library is really cool. They don't host like clothing swaps because we have organizations in town that do that, but they'll host like kitchen gadget swaps, seed swaps. Like, it's so cool, and being able to attend those things, or maybe even you be the person to start hosting them in your community, is a really great idea, and it's sustainable, obviously, instead of always buying new things. Speaking of library, use your library. I think that's obvious. At the beginning of this video, I talked about how I feel like the zero waste movement turned into just supporting brands that sell things that are plastic free. So I'm not here to recommend that, and that's kind of the antithesis of this video, not to just think of sustainability as plastic free, but I will say taking the time to consider supporting sustainable brands when you need to buy something is worthwhile, and something that would be more sustainable to do, like when we're talking about things like my cat food, or things that you can't avoid buying new, essentially. Taking the time to find sustainable brands is a good idea. Now, this is a big one, and I am going to take like a moment to talk about this because it's been life-changing for me. It's been so fulfilling, and that is advocacy, volunteering, and community work. So I choose a word of the year every year. In 2023, I chose the word community because I really wanted to focus in on where I live, in being more focused on local activism and making a difference outside of myself, essentially, was my goal. Giving back to my community, helping it out. It's a lot. My journey as an environmentalist, I've been all of the environmentalists, I always say, but going from the girl who just like shamed people for their actions to the person who tried to be a perfect environmentalist online, fast forward to now being the person whose favorite thing to say is do your best and advocate for the rest, where I no longer shame people, I no longer expect perfection from myself, because in the areas where I am not perfect, I feel fine about it because I'm doing so much work in my community to offset that, essentially, is the best way to say it. Since I have embarked on this journey, I've become the contact person for my neighborhood with City Council. I started hosting monthly potlucks with my neighbors. I became a member of the Parks Board of the City Council. I've hosted clothing sales where the proceeds go back to people who need food, access to food here in Austin. I've gotten to know my representatives, I've gotten to know so many people in my community, I've actually made friends, and I joined forces with other organizations and other friends I made to stop a huge development in Austin. Like, we had a huge win this year where they were working through the commissions and the boards of City Council to pass this plan to develop Zilker Park. I took action. Instead of letting myself spend so much time focusing on how I personally could be a perfect environmentalist, I put my time, energy, and effort towards helping stop this development plan, which the environmental impact of that is so much greater than anything I could do in my house. We're talking about tons and tons of concrete. We're talking about getting rid of permeable surfaces. We're talking about disrupting habitats, taking away access to nature to people. Like, we're talking about huge environmental impact that this project would have been. And I think that, like, when you see stuff like that happen, you really realize, oh, my time is much better spent doing these things than worrying about how perfect I can be. I totally understand why zero waste was seen as like the thing to do. I get it, but I think we can enter this new era where learning about organizations and what's going on in your local government, learning about those things is so much more important. And I just hope that me saying this can drive you to find out what councils you have, to find our commissions and boards, how you can get involved with those, find out about organizations that are doing things. Please, please, if you do nothing else from this video, go find an organization, follow them on social media, subscribe to their newsletter, and let me know in the comments which one you did it for, because it's really important. Also, vote. I don't think I need to say much more than that. It's so important. I don't care if you think it's not. It is, and I need you to do it. If you're a millennial and you're not registered to vote, I'm judging you. Please register and vote. Rainwater harvesting is something that I have done in the past, and I'm still waiting to get gutters put on this house. Owning a house comes with a lot of expenses, and putting up gutters is no cheap, so I can't really harvest rainwater without that. I mean, it is sitting out there, and it does harvest water when it rains, just not to the extent that it would if I had gutters and like a whole rainwater system. We're working on it, but that's a really eco-friendly thing you can do nothing to do with zero waste. Recycling kind of feels like a cheating one to put in here because it does have to do with waste, but I do think that recycling is still important. There's a lot of narratives out there about how recycling is a scam, and I do think recycling a lot of different types of plastic is a scam. Plastic number one is kind of the only one that's even worth doing. Recycling is still a great thing to do, and knowing how your city wants you to do it, if your things need to be clean, what you need to separate, what types of materials they accept, knowing that is really important. So I decided to put it on here. Imperfect Foods and Misfits Market are businesses that I think are worth supporting. They basically help stop food from going to landfills, and there are other organizations who do this too, like Too Good To Go is an app where you can buy restaurants food that they otherwise would be throwing out, go pick it up and get a dinner meal for like $2. It's amazing, but it is really impactful to avoid food waste and support businesses that are helping support avoiding food waste. Oh, also CSAs, Community Supported Agriculture. See if there's one near you. Repairing is something that we've gotten really away from, but I feel like the environmental movement needs to move back towards it. And not just on a like, I'm gonna fix my bra when it breaks kind of vibe, but like, again, we were talking about community work, advocacy, local government. This kind of goes all the way up to like a federal and even a worldwide level in a lot of ways. But advocating for laws to be anti-planned obsolescence, like the right to repair movement, is really good to look into, and I think we need to move back towards that. I think that makes more sense than spending so much time on plastic free, I'm just gonna say, because tech waste is like kind of maybe worse. And making things last. In addition, I have a series on TikTok, and I would love if you have any recommendations on how to make blank last longer. So I've talked about candles, sweaters, knives. There are all these little things that we can do to make the things that we have last longer. I would love any tips you have for making specific things last longer, like your iPhone or your iPhone chargers. I've been working on that one. In the same vein, trying to buy things that are quality versus quantity is a sustainable thing that has been like in the ether of environmentalism for a long time, but I feel like we don't get to enact it too much because it's so hard to find things that are quality these days, but it's another way to be sustainable that I think we should be reminded of. And I also want to say that we should keep learning in terms of like reading books, following organizations. Well, I mean, I try to make educational content. I hope I'm part of your keep learning journey. But I don't think ever deciding like I'm an environmentalist and I know everything and I'm ready to argue with anyone. I don't think that's a good approach to have, especially since combining intersectionality with your movement as a sustainable living person is really important. I think keeping learning is something we always need to be doing, and it is a way to progress like as a society and progress when it comes to climate change and sustainability. And then using that knowledge that you are continuing to take in and talking to people. People would ask me, how do I convince XYZ person to be more sustainable or to do a sustainable thing? And I would always say, don't worry about other people, focus on yourself, because unless you're perfect, you don't have any right to be telling other people what to do. And I do still think that's true. But I do think that conversations are really important. I've realized over the last couple of years that talking to people about things that you care about is what gets them to care. Not in a shameful way, not in a pressuring way, not in a demeaning way, but conversations about sustainability, about what climate change can do and why you're afraid of it and why you care about it and why it matters and why like our connection to nature matters and why sustainability is important. Like talking to people that you care about and that care about you about those things, I think is worthwhile. Speaking of keep learning and keep having conversations, if you know anyone who would benefit from learning some things from this video, make sure you share it with them. It can be a gentle little nudge. And I want to always keep in front of your mind my little slogan, which is do your best and advocate for the rest. I think this video has given a good overview of what that means. And I want to give another huge thank you to Climate Power for sponsoring this video. There will be links below for you to learn more. But that's it for today. Bye, guys.